Good day, this is Tony Ballinger from the Fighting Men of Rhodesia YouTube series. It's my great pleasure to have Dudley Wall back for his second talk. If you haven't heard his last talk, it's very good, very interesting. And I must admit, between Dudley and the other guys that I've interviewed from INTAF, my estimation of them has gone up 1,000%. Honestly, they filled in so many gaps that I was ignorant about. And it's a pleasure to have you back, Dudley.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's good to be able to talk to you again, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
It's great. And the last time we discussed things from landmines to cultural things to the one thing that's that really fascinated me is how underarmed you guys were in the beginning and the terrible risks that you took. You know, I was speaking to an SAS guy last night, and he said, you know, going on recce's 2 men into Mozambique, he said, I don't think that was as dangerous as what some of you guys did. And I'm beginning to appreciate that. So well done to you, INTAF guys. And
Thank you.
What can we say going forward with your talk today?
Well, I would say the following, that every Rhodesian bloke who served. And it doesn't matter what unit you were in, you did the things that you were required to do. And the blokes in INTAF, everyone that I've come across, has always had a sense of service, and it's always service of country and service of the people. And that's what we always used to look at from that point of view. Certainly, the blokes in INTAF had a big change in mindset as to what was required of them to be able to do their work. And the military training and such like was all centered around, first of all, anybody who had previous military service brought that to the fore, and that certainly helped out. Traditionally, the district assistants and such like were always in uniform, and they underwent a certain amount of basic training, which included drill and patrolling and such like. When the war started in earnest, most of the blokes were armed with old 303s from the war days. And as it got a little bit worse, we were quite fortunate in that some of the old SLRs that the army no longer used, because they were replaced by FN rifles, were sent our way. And so some of us were issued with old SLRs, which was a big improvement with reference to the firepower of the old 303. But certainly we trained probably using World War II era weapon handling tactics and such like, and it gained in momentum a little bit. I think also that as things happened, we were later on given 303 Bren guns, and those were replaced when the odd mag came online for us. I think we sort of inherited some of the old mags that the army no longer needed. Not that they didn't need them per se, but that they were getting really old. And it was a place to pass them on as opposed to scrapping them, which we were grateful for. We were also really fortunate in the ARUs, especially because each of the ARUs was issued with a 303 belt-fed machine gun that came out of the old Vampire aircraft, very high rate of fire and such like. And we mounted those on vehicles. And we also had tripods where we could use them on the ground, but in a fairly static position. By way of an illustration of the usefulness of them, I can remember one incident where we were deployed in the Mtoka area, and overnight we were based in one of the keeps that was sort of the focal point of the local protected village. And that particular night we came under quite a bit of mortar fire, but the enemy were able to cut the wires and come into the village, and they started setting fire to the huts and some of them had literally just been finished building. Their idea was that they would try and intimidate the locals into leaving, which was an advantage for them anyway, because if they were back in the field or back in their old villages, that was a much easier place for the enemy to contact them, to obtain information, to obtain food, home comforts, etc. But that particular night when we got mortared, we responded, first of all, the keep itself was in a earthen walled square type of construction thing, and on the parapets I got one of my blokes who was the machine gunner for the ARU to fetch the Browning with its tripod. We mounted it on the wall, and we started laying down a little bit of fairly accurate fire in an effort to try and persuade these people not to burn any of the further huts. Suffice to say, because it was such a quick firing weapon, we got, I remember a stoppage taking place at that particular time. It was about 2 a.m. that we were attacked, and obviously quite dark, except for the glow of the fire where the huts were burning. And my machine gunner bloke was in a situation where he needed to free the stoppage so we could continue. And I told him to go and get a torch because we couldn't see what we were doing.
Yeah.
And there we were on the parapet, and this bloke was shining the torch onto the weapon when the breech block was open. And I was trying to get it. There was a cartridge that had jammed in between, and it had stopped it from shutting to recycle the next round. So obviously the torch wasn't a good idea because these blokes saw us and they started shooting at us. It became a little bit more uncomfortable. But once the stoppage was sorted out, we continued. I must say, I also at that particular time realized that things were getting a bit more serious because there were more and more of the huts being set alight. So I took a patrol with about 3 or 4 blokes out, and we went out into the village. Not always something that most blokes did, but I personally thought it was the only way we were going to try and prevent them from burning any more. And that resulted in a little contact with some of the enemy. I can remember shooting at the one bloke. I saw him go down, and then things tended to calm down in that particular area. And within about another 20 minutes or so, obviously they realized that there were some of our blokes looking for them in the village, and that stopped that nonsense. And then it had all quietened down, and off they went. So yeah, several of the people did disappear. Several of the huts were burnt down. Implication though was we didn't go anywhere, and we had to restart again, getting the people back into the protected village and then rebuilding the houses. So yeah, from a weapon point of view, we were very grateful for that kind of a weapon.
Gee, that was a very brave move, Dudley. I mean,
I don't know whether it was brave or stupid.
Well, fire and movement in the daytime's tough enough, but to do it at night. And how did your men respond to that? The African guys.
I was really fortunate with that because most the blokes had all done a lot of intensive training. We trained and retrained. We did infantry type subjects when we were training at Chikurubi before the ARU was formed. So fire and movement was an everyday occurrence for us, patrolling and all those sort of things. Having said that, they came out with me. They knew because I was going, and I would have gone anyway. And I didn't want a whole lot of them with me because of the dangers involved. And the rest of them were on the parapet of the keep giving a bit of covering fire. So it was a calculated risk more than anything else. But it did help out, and it did stop the enemy from burning more huts down. And they were positive, my blokes.
I think they were incredibly brave guys because, up in the tangent area, we had to keep it tracked. 52 mortars were fired. It lasted 2 hours, this attack. And the INTAF guys there were all on the parapet wall of this keep with their 303s. They never ran into the bunkers. They stayed there. The flashes were going off everywhere. And boy, they were gritty and very brave. So I just want to honor them in the process of these talks as well, because it's impossible to get hold of these chaps to speak to. And so we sometimes get a rather distorted view that it was only the white guys fighting, but they were very brave, and I want to honor them.
No, thank you very much. I agree as well. I had big admiration for them. I was quite fortunate with our ARU because we had a number of ex-RAR blokes with. We had a couple of other ex-army blokes, and they brought their training with, and they were really good. They could be relied on to do their thing. And we operated in our particular troop much the same way that any infantry unit would be, by way of sending out 4-man sticks. For obvious reasons, because of the possibility of Gazovac and such like. So yes, and I could rely on them to do what they had to do. And they've obviously contacted the enemy on a number of occasions. And I'd lost 1 or 2 guys. Yes, that is so. And 1 or 2 were wounded. But that was the nature of the job. And for us, it wasn't so much a matter of take a chance. It was something that we relied on by way of the training that we did. And we constantly retrained. We did the 6 weeks out in the field and then 10 days back in. And in those 10 days, 7 days we used for a bit of R&R, and then the rest of it was to retrain, re-zero weapons and such like, then go back out again. Because we knew in the reinforcement of the local district administration, some of the other fellows didn't like the idea, so obviously they were quite aggressive when it came to us, and they had a go. It was the nature of the job.
I think one of the biggest failings of our army, and perhaps there wasn't enough time to do it, but to train us to speak the local language. You know, if you were going to operate in Matabeleland, speak Ndebele, or at least get the basics of the language, because, you know, I often crept up within hearing distance of people in kraals, but I hadn't got a clue what they were talking about. Yeah, I was hoping to see a weapon or something that would indicate the Tersu in the area, but man, if only we'd been able to follow what they were saying around the fireside at night, you know.
It's very useful. It reminds me of another story, and in our old age we do get to be a little bit forgetful. But here's another story of the Mtoko days. Philippa Berlin was a well-known author and linguist, and she was responsible for teaching some of the SAS blokes to speak Shona. And she actually, as a lady of her mature age, I will say that, came out to Mtoko and deployed with us on one patrol in an effort to try and pick up on the dialects and such like, so she could reintroduce that into whatever she did with her responsibilities in teaching people to speak. You know, it was for me firstly slightly surprising that this elderly lady wanted to walk around with us in the TTLs, and that she wanted to make contact with the local people and such like. She was an amazing lady, and I salute her too, obviously, because she was doing her bit type of thing. And that's the case of all the women folk. I mean, we had a number of ladies working in INTAF, some of whom were in uniform, some of them were cadet district officers and such like, and they all did their thing. We had a number of, especially in our part of the world, Shona ladies who were part of the community development team. They wore a green and white check uniform, and those ladies went out and about and taught the villagers fundamental things like health and sewing and knitting and goodness knows what else, in an effort to try and make sure that their standard of living was one that sort of enabled them to look after themselves. And so, yeah, they played a major role as far as that's concerned. I can also remember one or two of them being the targets of the enemy, and certainly a couple of them were murdered. And they were completely unarmed. They were, I mean, really doing a good job, I have to say.
And Dudley, perhaps I'm under the misapprehension or idea that Internal Affairs only interacted with the African peoples. Were you also responsible for the European farms in the areas you operated in?
Yes, we were, and we administered to the law, etc., when it came to the tribal trust areas and the African purchase areas, private farming land that had been bought by Africans. But we certainly also patrolled in the European farming areas, and the big responsibility there was the business of civil defense per se. And of course, as the situation got worse, the government introduced a radio system called Agric Alert, and they were distributed to all the farmers in the area, and the ComSen, if you wish, centrally positioned, was always at the DC's office. So there was always a radio operator on duty in the DC's ComSen, monitoring all the different calls. And by the same token, we used the Agric Alert to warn the farming community of things that may be happening in a particular area, and such movements of the enemy that we picked up and that sort of thing. We also were involved in giving advice with reference to home defense and such like, and that was done in conjunction with the BSAP. The BSAP blokes were amazing with that sort of stuff. And I can remember a mixed team, BSAP and INTAF, going out to different farms and helping out with the layout of the defense of the farmstead and the security fencing and gates and such like. And some of the people were quite innovative there too, obviously. Shotgun cartridges outside attached to tripwires, etc. It was quite an effective way of looking after them. And yes, so we did that too. INTAF was also responsible for the issue of firearms licenses and such. So any person, no matter who they were, whether they were from the TTLs or whether they were from the farming community, all their licenses came through from the DC side. We had processed all of that and kept it a legal thing. So we were well aware of where all the private firearms were. And of course, there were a number of chaps who lived in the TTLs and the African purchase areas who owned shotguns and rifles for hunting purposes and such like. So yeah, we certainly knew all about that too. But working with the farming community, it was part of the everyday job. We were also births and deaths officers. So marriages came along on occasion, and people wanting to get married and wanted a civil ceremony. We conducted those too. And so while all of that general administration was going on, there was an equal amount of stuff that was going on out in the field from a conflict point of view. And yeah, it was interesting to have one foot in one camp and another foot in the other, so to speak.
In the war in Vietnam, they actually, the people that they identified as on site, they actually armed them to defend themselves against the NVA and all that sort of stuff. Would that have been something that we could have done or should have done? Would it have worked, or would it have just been a source of ammo and weapons for the tours?
I have a feeling that it would probably be quite a chancy thing. And my reasoning for saying that was that because we were so small by way of the whole security force family, it was difficult to have a presence in every particular area. So if one did do that sort of thing, it's quite possible that while you weren't in the area, the local group of the enemy who came in and made contact with the locals to try and subvert them and to get them on sides their side would have seen this as another supply of weapons and ammunition, possibly. Certainly some of the chiefs had people that looked after them, perhaps a bodyguard if you wish, and they were armed with shotguns. And on occasion, those guys lost their shotguns due to this very reason. So from a psychological point of view, it might have been comforting, but at the end of the day, the enemy would have certainly taken big advantage of that. It brings me to say something else. After I got shot up in the ambush when I was with the ARUs in Rhodesia, I came out of hospital and I was transferred to Marandellas. And when I got to Marandellas, it was the time when Bishop Muzorewa's men had come about to join ourselves as part of the Security Force Auxiliaries, or Fumorivanu as we knew them. And I was given the opportunity of having a platoon of them to deploy with. So my job, largely because of my experience with the ARU, I was given the Fumorivanu platoon to look after as a platoon commander. We also had a BSAP chappie who was directly responsible for them. And by way of a bit of background, with the SFAs, I'll call them that, their command and control fell under the Special Forces Brigade headquarters, which was a particular brigade that was formed for this reason. They later on looked after the Zulu Scouts and SAS, I believe, but their big responsibility was the SFAs. And they established a training base at Domboshawa, where most of them who had come out of the field, because at one point they were all enemy, and then changed sides, and they decided that they were still going to follow Bishop Muzorewa as he was standing for election to become the next president, or prime minister, I should say. They underwent military training, the instructors all drawn from the army, and once they finished their training, they were then deployed to all the different areas in Rhodesia where they thought they would be of some sort of effect. Certainly in the Marandellas area, the white farming community were rather dubious about it, and I think that was the case throughout, because these guys were still walking around, many of them in their enemy-type uniforms, carrying AK-47s. A number of my blokes had AK-47s and what have you. And they were, from a discipline point of view, fairly mediocre, I would say. I'm trying to be polite here. Some of them were okay, some of them weren't. We had a couple of African senators come and visit in Marandellas at one point, and one of my blokes was carrying an AK, and he had an F1 hand grenade, and he took a great dislike to this senator bloke. So he pulled the pin out of the F1 grenade and told him he was going to sort him out.
Wow.
We calmed the situation down and eventually got the pin back in its proper place, but it just demonstrated the kind of discipline that these guys had. They eventually, the majority of them were issued with G3 rifles, and they were put into a sort of chocolate khaki type of uniform with T-shirts and Fumaravanu written all over them and such like. I think that the idea, the concept was a good one, but I think it was introduced slightly too late. And of course, these guys had the knowledge of the enemy, those that had not yet decided where they were going to go. And we could have made better use of them. But we also needed to sort out the discipline problems and such like. Their training was semi-reasonable. The blokes that I had, we were involved in one or two contacts in the Marandellas area. They certainly didn't run away or anything, but they weren't as disciplined, for example, as obviously as the DAs and the army chaps that were in the area. But yes, it was an interesting time period because it was something really controversial, I will say. And the local farming community didn't think that this was a good idea at all. But having said that, it was there. And of course, when Muzorewa won the elections in 79, the country became Zimbabwe Rhodesia. And that changed matters quite a bit. It certainly didn't change the attitude of the rest of the world. But here we were with an African prime minister, and they still wanted to get rid of him, which obviously happened in 1980. I have to say that influenced me quite a bit towards the end, because this was 1979 at that particular stage. And for me personally, I thought that we're not going to remain Rhodesia. We'd obviously changed to a Zimbabwe Rhodesia type of name, but that things were going to get worse as opposed to better. Yeah. And I took the opportunity to take a day's leave or two, and I went to the South African embassy in Salisbury, and I asked them if I could apply to join the South African Army. And they were quite amenable to that suggestion, so I filled in all the necessary forms and such like, and they said that they would let me know. I went back to Marandellas, went back into the field, did my patrolling thing and what have you, and I didn't hear anything from the South African embassy at all for a little while. And then all of a sudden, my dad, who at that particular time was serving in the BSAP, sent me a little telegram saying, "Listen, chap, there's Officer Selection Board in Pretoria. I've booked you a ticket on Rhodesian Airways. You better get your butt into gear and get down there and do it," which is exactly what I did do. And it was an interesting experience doing that, because as a Rhodesian, I was thinking, well, okay, here I am, arrive at Salisbury Airport, get on the aircraft. But there were a couple of other blokes there, fellow Rhodesians. One bloke was a major in the RLI, and he had the exact same idea. So we went down and we did exactly the same officer board in Pretoria.
Dudley, before we go on to the South African experience, which I'm looking forward to, I'd like to ask you to just, I think, of the 3 or 4 landmines you hit, you described one.
Yes.
When you destroyed government property. That was your first attempt at destroying. Can you just run through the others? And then I'd like to know some of your experiences of African culture around witchcraft and how they use the witches and the hunters and all that to influence the people.
Righto. First landmine, by way of a little bit of background, I was driving a Land Rover that was virtually brand new and belonged to the district commissioner himself, and that got destroyed. So yeah, that didn't make me overly popular. Having said that, as things were going on in the Mtoko area, the road from Mtoko into the Chimoyo area, which is towards the Mozambique border, the road out there was known as Landmine Alley because there were so many landmines on it, and a number of civilians detonated mines as well. And we eventually had a need to try and get the road sorted out. But my second one was on the lines of, I was second vehicle in a 2-vehicle convoy, and we were visiting some of the protected villages and keeps in an effort to plan further operations for the ARU and such like. And driving down this particular road going towards the keep at Chimoyo, first vehicle went past landmine, second vehicle, nothing doing. When we came back again, we needed to turn off a side road and go through a mission station to get onto the tarred road. And as I turned the corner, there was a mine there, and I happened to hit it. Left front vehicle, written off Land Rover.
Describe your sort of the feelings of what it's like to hit a landmine. You know, there's shock, there's disorientation. What did
Yeah,
you go through?
it's the first time you hit a mine, you realize what's happening. The force of the blast certainly lifts the vehicle off the ground, and there's a lot of dust and smoke and such like. And with that first one, the sump of the Land Rover was really badly damaged, so there was bits of oil and such like coming up, and it burns your skin a bit and the like. That they were mine protected, that they've got plates over the four wheels and the bars is of some comfort. And I first one, I felt as if I've got absolutely no control over this situation whatsoever. 1 minute I'm driving the vehicle, and the next minute I'm just sitting there. And the noise is quite something, because you're right in the center of this blast. Bits of the Land Rover fly around.
That's something I want to ask you. Sorry to interrupt, Dudley.
No, not at all.
The first mine, in fact, the second and other mines, I never heard a thing. I never heard the explosion. Did you hear the explosion?
Yeah, you don't really hear it because you're in the center of the thing. And the sound waves go outwards. So,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
like a
it's
void.
exactly so.
Mm.
Yeah. And I obviously it frightens you, because you've got no control, and you know that something's happening, and you know that it's a bad thing that's happening, but there's nothing you can do about it. The second time I hit a mine, it really, that was probably the most frightening of all three of them. And as I drove around the corner, I thought, well, the first vehicle's gone past, well, we were okay here. And obviously not. And there were a couple of like a little village right on the corner there of that particular mine site. And after the vehicle came to a halt on the ground, my passenger was injured. I got out, and I thought to myself, well, if there's any enemy, because quite often that's what they did, they would plant a mine and wait in an ambush position and shoot at you when you have a problem.
That was my biggest fear, the ambush. Yeah.
Exactly. So our drills will always get out of the vehicle as soon as possible, take all round defense cover, and fire into some likely possible places where they might be hiding, which I did do. I have to say, I did shoot at the couple of houses quite a bit. And then when all the dust settled and we realized that we weren't being shot at, and we were trying to, I left my guys in all round defense, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And then I started looking after the bloke who was injured. And then an elderly man and a little boy of about 7, 8 came out of one of the houses. And I thought to myself, why didn't you warn us? Or what have you? Oh, I was also surprised that he hadn't been shot, to be honest. And then as we started, I was obviously quite worked up by then, and I had a verbal chat with the chap. And he said, no, it's not his fault. And I saw, leaning up against the wall of the hut, a shovel. And I had a little look at it. This bloke had lent his shovel to the enemy to dig the hole, and also lent him some water to make the ground a little bit softer to be able to bury the TM57.
Yeah.
So yeah, that niggled me quite a bit. But the feeling of absolute fear the second time, because you know what's happening, and you know that you can't do anything about it at all. That was scary. The third one was same road, about 6 weeks later. And because there had been so many mines on the road, we were moving a convoy of African Development Fund vehicles, graders and trucks, and blokes who were going to fix up the road and try and fill in the holes and grade the road properly and such like. And as we were traveling along that, there was a Land Rover in front of me, or it might have been a Leopard, or armored personnel type thing based on a VW, and then myself in a Land Rover, then the grader, then a truck and another truck, and some labourers in a third truck. And the bloke in front of me was our agricultural officer, a chap by the name of Dave Ford. And he drove along, went past, nothing wrong with him kind of thing, and then I found the mine again. Another Land Rover gone, so scrapped the third one. And by the third time you've hit a mine, you're inclined to know exactly what's going on now, so you can sort of it's easier to deal with the situation. We got out of the vehicle. Nobody else was hurt. I had a co-driver in it, one of the district assistants, and he was okay. Checked the area once again, same sort of drills, arranged for the vehicle to be recovered and arranged for the rest of the convoy to go do their job. The local protected village where we had been shot up that evening and burnt, that we discussed a little bit earlier on, those guys provided some of the manpower to look after this group of people who were repairing the road and such like. So, yeah, that was the third one. I had a fourth incident where I didn't actually hit the mine, but we were deployed in the Shinga area of Mudzi, and we were given a task of looking for people that had that were living in the area and needed to go into the local protected village. And we were patrolling there, and I went into a particular area. 2 vehicles. I was driving a Puma truck. It's a 5-ton Nissan Toyota type thing that's been armored, and a second vehicle. And we had, I think I had about 14 DAs with me so that we could do the job and what have you. And as we were driving along, it was very hilly countryside with quite thick bush on either side. And quite, as you know, granite copies all over the place. And a lot of the granite is on the surface of the road. So you drive over little bits of granite here and there. So you drive very carefully and very slowly. And as I got off this one bit of granite rock that was part of the road, there were about 35 of the NM, 30, however many there were, 30 I think it was. The one bloke detonated a mine electrically right in front of the vehicle. And it messed up the radiator a little bit, but because the bush was so thick there was no place to get out of the killing ground. And so I was stuck. And there was this big hole where the mine went off. Luckily, he did it too early. And I couldn't go backwards because I had a vehicle behind me. And the guys on the vehicle at the back had started debussing, and they were dealing with some of this sort of ambush type thing. The enemy fired, I can't remember how many RPG-7s at us. I can remember the one hit the side of the truck, but because they were sloping and it didn't have enough time to arm itself, it went straight up into the air and disappeared. Oh. And then this particular ambush site was really well organized by the enemy, I have to say that, because it was electrically detonated mine plus the RPG-7s, and then there was a 60mm mortar placed a little bit further away, and they started mortaring us. The rest of them in that particular position certainly scored quite a few hits on the vehicles and such. The situation started to get a little bit delicate because they didn't sort of hit and run. They stayed there for a little while, and there was a firefight that went on for a good maybe 10, 15 minutes or so. And because the blokes were all issued with 5 magazines on their rifles, we're getting low. Mm-hmm. And one of the corporals, I always made sure that on one of the trucks there was a wooden case of ammunition spare for just in case. And in this particular case, it certainly paid off. And one of the corporals who was undercover got up, pulled the crate off the vehicle and started dishing out ammunition. And as he got up to get to the thing, he was okay. He managed to do his job and what have you. But when everything subsided, I counted, he had a couple of bullet holes that had just nicked the side of his shirt. Oh. So it was really close for him. I wrote up a commendation for the bloke, which he got, sort of same thing as military forces commendation. We had a commendation where the blokes wore a little metal, it's like a bugle. We called it an olifant, a war horn that's worn on the service medal that the blokes got. So he got one of those. My sergeant major was in the vehicle with me, and he directed quite a bit of fire. Those vehicles are quite interesting from a point of view of the driver's cab is completely separate to the rest of the vehicle. I can remember standing up and shooting at some of the guys into where I thought they were because I didn't see anybody. And by 20 minutes or so, the fire subsided, and again, all-round defense type of thing. Then discovered that one of my blokes had been shot in the head, and another bloke had been shot in the foot. The bloke who detonated the mine, the enemy chappie, he was dispatched. And so we recovered his body. Having said that, I then radioed for a Casevac for my two guys, and an Alouette arrived within about 30 minutes, 20 minutes or so. They came from the fire force guys at Mtoko, and they came to pick these two guys up. And on board that particular helicopter was a bloke by the name of Nick Downey, who worked for Thames Television or whatever, and he filmed part of the aftermath of this particular contact. Which was quite something. And so there's a video clip that floats about with that particular interview after the incident type of thing. The chappie that got shot in the head, the chap by the name of Ruben Moyo, good bloke. He was taken to Mtoko and then from there to Salisbury, and I was able to visit him a couple of days later because we were towards the end of the trip, and a couple of the guys came with me to visit him in hospital, and unfortunately that was the end of him. He'd lost consciousness and never regained consciousness, despite everything that the guys tried to do to get him. The bloke with the round in the foot was fine. After he got sorted out, he was back on duty, and a couple of month or so afterwards. So yeah, that was at Landmine number 4, an exciting time, I think.
I've never heard of an electric detonation. That's quite unique.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure that they tried it a few times here and there type of thing, but that was it wasn't something that happened that regularly. Most of the time they'd bury the mine and disappear. But in this particular case, I think we were really annoying the enemy because we had been quite successful in getting so many people into the protected villages. And while there are a lot of people who feel that the whole protected village concept was a bit of a waste of time, perhaps. I personally think that it had big effect on the enemy because they kept on shooting and attacking the protected villages. Even if it was a little hit and run with a couple of mortar bombs and off you go type of thing, they did it regularly. I mean, we came under fire in the keeps, I don't know how many times. But what it says to me is that having the people of the area in a more concentrated area, they weren't restricted from doing their work and going and working in the fields, etc., etc. They were obviously entitled to do that, and they did do that, but that they were safe at night. That was the time that the enemy wanted to gain a bit of home comfort and information and such like. And I think that we were beginning to have an effect as far as that's concerned.
And the fish need water to swim through, the fish being the toes and the water being the people.
Absolutely right.
They need that contact, and if you break that contact, yes, they're in a hard place.
Yes, exactly so. So I thought, in that regard, it's quite effective. But those were my mine incidents.
That's really fascinating. I like the way you've detailed it. I know in the area I operate, the keep I was in, I just couldn't stand all this thick bush with boulders and trees and mile after mile of perfect ambush positions. So I got the hell in one day, and I burned 10 Ks out either side of the keep. Just fortunately it was only like 30 meters of bush, and then it was crops,
right,
plowed land. But that border strip, I just burnt it out because you never know when you're going to get an ambush, do you?
No, you don't. You don't, and it happens very suddenly. And quite often, especially in the southern parts of the Mtoko district, the enemy used to dig trenches and such like across the dirt roads, and then stones and put branches and what have you in an effort to try and slow down. We quite often had to go out and lift that sort of stuff to get the vehicles going again, because the local civilian transport, although it was very minimalistic, it still carried on. The local buses and such like in the Mtoko area, Matambo Nodza buses were the main ones, and up in the Chirewa area, I can remember an incident where a mine a bus hit a mine, I beg your pardon. And in that, 3 or 4 people were killed, including the driver, because it was a front detonation. And
terrible.
It just carried on. Mines in Mtoko were quite a big problem. There was a businessman by the name of Kano Yangwa who drove around in a Peugeot 404 van type thing. And one day he was coming into Mtoko to do his business. He owned a number of general dealer shops and the like, and he was coming in for resupplies, and he hit one of them, and there was literally nothing left of his van. Both he and his wife were killed.
Mm. Mm.
So yeah, it was a scourge.
I think the biggest one I missed was we had I've mentioned this in previous talks, so if I'm boring anyone, had an engineer on the back with a dog, and for some reason or other, either the dog or the engineer had a sixth sense about something, and he stopped our truck, walked forward with the dog, no more than 25 to 30 meters, and the dog sat down, or they do whatever they do, and he carefully scraped that away, and it was a boosted mine, one on top of the other. And
Yeah,
you know, by the grace of God, I often look back and think, Lord,
absolutely.
what did you do to save me in the war? You know, and I owe him a lot. But yeah, they dastardly things. They also had clever ways of warning their own people who were on sides with them where the mine was. I often found a tuft of grass just
Yes,
on the side of the road. They just tied a knot in some grass.
yes.
One of the reasons why I burnt the whole area out anyway, so they had no grass to tie. But
That was a good idea, I
yeah,
have to say. Yeah,
yeah.
they did leave signs sometimes.
Mm.
Absolutely, a little pile of rocks or a piece of plastic tied to something. There
Yes.
were
And
a couple
then
of
a guy who was on site with them, he would know a mine's there. It would always be positioned where the tires are. So he would bring his tire onto the central lane and his off tire on the side of the road, and he would go like that and be saved from his own mates' mines. But
yeah.
I once went into the scrapyard, KG6 barracks, I think it was, or somewhere, I can't remember where it was, and saw all the damaged vehicles from the war that had never been repaired. And there were pookies, and there were this, and there were
Yeah,
that. Just hundreds of them with holes, wheels missing. It must have been a terrible strain on our economy to fix those vehicles all the time.
I agree with that. The INTAF vehicles were repaired by the CMED guys, which is the government transport setup, and there were lots of them that just couldn't be repaired, and then the others were cannibalized to try and get a vehicle going because it was, you know, with sanctions and such, like it wasn't a freely available commodity for us.
And the retrieval was incredibly efficient. You know, our army
Yeah,
was incredibly efficient. That first one I hit was in the middle of nowhere, and I think it wasn't the next morning, but the next morning it was towed away. It was incredible.
yes. I think, yeah, I think that was the Army Service Corps blokes who were responsible for that sort
Mm.
of thing, and they were really good at their job as well, I have to
Yeah.
say. Yeah, often that they would recover INTAF vehicles as well. So yes, I quite agree. Funny enough, with my second landmine, for example, uh, one of the blokes who was working on at the DC station in Mtoko came to me one day after the incident had happened. And he said, "Oh, I've just got a letter from a friend of mine. Apparently, you're dead." And then Shona had written there about how I got killed in the second mine incident.
So they planned it, but it failed.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So an interesting thing that the people spoke to each other about these things, and people were well aware
Mm.
of all the different incidents that took place. So obviously, it had some kind of impact on them.
Talking about people speaking to each other, their bush telegraph was quicker than our radio messages on some occasions. I couldn't believe how information just fed through their networks. It's incredible.
Yes, it is. It is fast, I have to say, and obviously those weren't the days of mobile phones and such like. But
Mm.
certainly, they were able to pass messages on very,
Yeah.
very quickly with each other, and people knew what was going on. It wasn't a matter of people living in a remote area not knowing that there was a war on, or
Mm.
everybody knew what was going on.
Absolutely. Dudley, one thing I've been longing to talk to you about, and it's a completely different topic, is some of the spiritual encounters that you came across with the witch doctors and that type of thing. They were very important to the people, and maybe we could have used them more to influence the war towards our way. I don't know if that's positive, hopeful thinking, but what are some of the really hair-raising, scary things you saw on that side, or did you not see any?
I certainly the Shona people have. Over the years, they put lots of store in spiritual things because it's part of who they are,
Yeah.
and they believe in an ancestral worship type of I will call it a religion, where the ancestors either are once a person dies, the ancestral spirit then resides in another person and such like. And there are certain ceremonies that take place. for those particular spirits to be able to do that sort of thing. I look at it from a point of view of the following, that there were different sort of divisions of spirituality, if you want to call it that. I don't know whether that's the right term, actually. But there were those that practiced witchcraft. Ngangas were herbal healer types, but they also had an ability to do that sort of thing. And you could go and visit one of the herbalist type people and get a concoction of medicine, for want of another better word, that you could use to put a spell on someone else, or the Muroi Varoi kind of witch type person. Certainly in the northeast of the country, there were many stories of these witches riding around on hyenas and such like, and looking for people to kill and the like. That was an absolute belief of the local people in the area. And I think I described in the first talk an incident where a woman got shot up in a roadblock, and one of my blokes who did the shooting later on that evening he went into a trance, and once he woke up in the morning, Sergeant Major said, yes, he's been possessed by the spirit of one of his ancestors, who was a hunting type person and was a very good shotist. And that incident triggered the spirit to come live with him because he had actually shot and killed somebody. And knowing the customs and such like, I gave the bloke a week's leave because he was obliged to go back home and speak with his immediate family and the people of his village, and then undergo a ceremony where that spirit could be accepted into him, and everybody would acknowledge the fact that that spirit is now residing in this man. And that did happen. And our next time of going back to Chickaruby and being on the range and such like, he was the best shotist in our troop by far. He used to play around with a piece of cardboard on the butt and take his rifle and fire at the cardboard to chase it over the top and around the back, kind of thing. It was just something that was seen by me. I had difficulty with the believing, but that an ancestral spirit could reside in another person, because that's not the way I grew up as a Christian. I found that quite strange, but I saw it with my own eyes. I've been in other situations. There was one incident where we visited a person who was a spirit medium, and this spirit mediums tend to dress in a certain way. They have cloaks and they have bits and pieces. We visited this guy and I went into his little hut, and he said, "Oh, well, come in and I'll show you around," kind of business. And he had all manner of plant-based material and cloth and what have you. And he had in Shona Hakata, it's a little bone type things or wood type things, and they've all got markings on and such like. They used to predict the future and such like. And he had those there. And the explanation of this is that this particular bloke was able to predict the future by using Hakata. And he was also able to go into a trance and speak to the ancestors. And he actually, while we were visiting the bloke, he went into a trance and he spoke in a completely different voice. And he was saying certain things that involved an ox wagon and oxen and leading the oxen using a big whip. And when he came back out of the trance, the opportunity was there to ask him what that was all about. And he didn't really remember too much about it until we described what he had said and such like. And then he said, "Oh, no, I'm possessed by my great-great-grandfather, who was one of the young men who looked after Cecil John Rhodes's oxen." And it was gone back to a situation of leading Rhodes's wagon and oxen type of thing. And it was very realistic from that point of view. And again, when he goes into a trance, his whole voice changes. His whole body language changes. And it is as if he's possessed by such a thing. And
from a Christian point of view, you and I know that it's a familiar spirit, which
exactly,
which is a demon.
Yes,
that's known your blood bloodline, and it speaks well with the knowledge of what happened in the past. But
Yes.
the hold that it has over the African people of the day, I'm sure it's still very much the same in rural areas, is that it could cause terrible terror to fall on anybody that was cursed or blamed or had a finger at them. I heard of one story once, and I honestly don't know if it's true, where one of these guys was told he was going to die or something, and the next day he was dead.
Yes.
He
Yes.
wasn't stabbed, he wasn't murdered, he died just because he had been told you're going to die, and that was it.
Yeah, and the belief is there to the extent that it actually happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Shona people have other spirits as well. There's such a spirit referred to as a Shave, and a Shave spirit is more benign and will possibly help you to overcome certain difficulties, and sometimes being mischievous, they would also do the opposite, depending on whether they thought that the person needed to be taught a lesson and such like. There were water spirits, there were all manner of things. Most of the Shona people believed that in certain pools and in certain rivers, spirits lived in the water, and they had to give them the necessary respect and such like. So yeah, they certainly believed in that sort of thing as well. The business of tribal or herbal medicine and such like, throughout the areas that I operated in, there were guys who dealt in that kind of thing. They were known as the people, if you've got a headache, you go to them, they'll prescribe a certain plant root or whatever it may be. And if you take that, then it'll sort your problems out. If you were married and you wanted a successful marriage, you would go to the bloke and obtain certain roots and leaves and whatever it was. And that would help you to establish a family and that kind of thing. There were many of those sort of things, but it's genuinely a part of the life of a person who lives in that part of the world. And it's something that most of the, I'm sticking my neck out here, most of the white people tended to have an understanding of it, knew that it was happening, but at the same time were really skeptical about everything because it's the complete opposite of what the average European person is grown up with and believes and such like. So
yeah, I mean, I was aware of the African members of my church in Harare. They would listen and they would sing to the Lord, and then in the evening they'd go off to the witch doctors because they hadn't quite separated the thing in their minds. There was this deep cultural thing that had been burnt into them for millennia, and they just couldn't separate that. But obviously, at a point when some of them became truly born again, that separation happened. But it was such a hold on them.
Yeah, it was a hold on them, and of course there was also a situation where some people went to Christian church. I knew of a couple of black Rhodesians who were towards the Jewish faith, and those that were towards the Christian faith, a lot of them belonged to a Zionist type movement.
Yes.
And they were known as the Vapostori. They wore long white robes, and they would meet on Sunday in an open area, and they would conduct a ceremony and such like.
Yeah.
And of course, their standard greeting in Shona was Rugare Ngaruande, which means peace, may you find it, which is very honorable. But they also believed a little bit in the things of the other spiritual world, if I might call it that. And so they kind of did a mix and match type of thing there. But the Vapostori were generally very nice people and very peaceful and such like. And they went about their own business, and you could see them all over the place.
I think you could sum it up with the word voodoo. In Central America, in Haiti and places like that, all these guys would dress up with weird masks, and they would have Christian crosses and all the symbolism of Christians, but then they've got all these horrible things floating around them. It's like a mesh of two religious beliefs, isn't it?
Yeah. No, absolutely right. So yeah, there was quite a bit of that going on. One of the things I do know as well is that the colors red, white, and black were very significant from a spiritual point of view for especially the Shona people, and a lot of my DAs and civvies as well wore beads in black, red, and white. and they signified the spiritual side of things and the things that they believed in. I tell this small little story. We were on patrol in Chirewa, which is up in the north of Mtoko quite a bit, and the chief there is a chieftainess. She was a woman. And Chieftainess Chirewa, one of only 2 or 3 in the whole country, lived in a little village, very isolated place, and white people were generally never allowed to go in there. And perhaps over the years and years, maybe 3 or 4 people, whiteys, had ever been able to go in and actually visit with her. And I had that opportunity. But with her situation, the interesting thing about that is although she's a woman, she has a husband who's also, or a wife who's also a woman, because the spirit that dominates her is a male spirit, and that male spirit had to have a wife. So she didn't have a opposite sex partner. Her partner was another woman, and this woman, they were both very elderly people. They were probably in their late 70s, 80s, somewhere around there. And if you wanted to go and speak to them, and we had need to go and speak to them, because that tribal trust land was on one of the big infiltration routes, and we wanted to try and keep it free as possible of enemy incursions and such like. So the idea was we set up a meeting for this lady, and after a good month or 2 of negotiating and what have you, she finally agreed to us meeting her. One of the big things for her, though, she's not allowed to leave the village at all, so we had to go to her. There's only one time in the year when she's allowed to go, and that's to go out of the village, and that's to one of the nearby hills, and it's a very hilly area. And the reason why was because all the ancestral people were buried in that particular place, and there was a ceremony sweeping the graves, and she and her partner plus a few of the elders went up there. They did their particular traditional thing. She wasn't allowed to walk there. She had to be carried the whole way, because her feet weren't allowed to be on unclean soil. And the only clean soil was at the couple of houses that she lived in. And the like. And when we went to speak to her, she was fairly approachable. But the first thing was nothing red. Red was taboo. Anything coloured red was taboo. And of course, INTAF's main colours in their uniforms were khaki and red. So we had to leave all of that behind and go and visit with her. And one of the things as well is if you go visit a person of that importance, you must bring a gift. And we did a bit of homework and such like, and realised what sort of gift we wanted. Cloth was fine. White cloth and black cloth was fine. And snuff was fine. So we went and bought a bit of that sort of stuff to take with. And the whole idea is you're on the outskirts of the village. You send one of the DAs in who was knowledgeable of these things and the like. And he then made entrance into the village, and that was passed on to the chieftainess. And then the gifts were given over, and that was accepted. And then we were allowed to sit with her and have a little chat. And we were with her for an hour or 2 and spoke about things. Obviously, we spoke about the enemy and strangers and that kind of stuff. And she wasn't overly happy with that kind of conversation, because for her it didn't happen. And she wouldn't know anyway, because she's not allowed out of this little complex of huts. So, sure, certainly afterwards, the enemy did get into that area, but we were able to keep them out of there for a good 6 months odd or so prior to that. And then eventually, as more and more of the enemy came into the country, it became so overwhelming that they just saturated the northeast of the country. But again, it had to do with spiritual matters as far as she was concerned, and the type of things that she did. She was also a person who went into a trance, or who had supernatural powers of sorts to control the rain and this and the people and such like. So yeah, there's lots of that. And Rhodesia is the place.
You touched on something interesting there, that the only place she was allowed to go out to was a hill. They buried their dead on the hill. The hills were sort of symbolic of the strongmen of the demons that, in the spiritual realm, in Christianity, you've got the archangels, which are right in front of God. You've got the seraphim, all the others, and then you get ordinary angels. And there's a similar structure in the demonic realm. When Michael was sent to speak to Daniel, he was delayed by the Prince of Persia, which is a demonic strong man. And in my studies of this in Rhodesia, a lot of the hilltops and areas were seen as real strongholds, and they had to be a place where you had to go up to and almost worship strong men.
They were spiritual places for the Shona people. And certainly the enemy made good use of this knowledge as well, because they knew that if they could control the spirit mediums, they could control the people. So often the very first person they would go and visit was the local spirit medium, and they would ask for blessing. And once that communication had been opened, it allowed them to start controlling the rest of the people because they had them on their side.
Wow, that's a very powerful tool. It's a little bit like the in Ireland, you know, where the guys, the Catholics and all that. It was all through religion, really, in many ways, wasn't it? It's the separation of the two. Dudley, we've come to an hour and 10 minutes or whatever.
That's good.
Like I said when I first met you, or it might have been somebody else, I want more than one talk out of you. So your third is going to be your South African stuff. It's too late to go into it now.
Right. No, that's fine. Absolutely right. We've led up to that.
Yes. And it's been truly fascinating. And I want to thank you for participating.
It's a pleasure.
I look forward to our next talk very much indeed. And I'd like to just say to the audience in general, my appeal I make at the end of every video is to please support John if you can through Patreon. Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We'd like to get up to 20,000. We're not too far off now. But once again, Dudley, thank you very much and go well.
Pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate the talk. Look after yourself.
You too. Thank you, my friend. God bless. Bye.
You too. Bye.